So I'm really excited to have you all here. I'm Kathy Fisher. I'm the Associate Director of the Women's Center, for the one person who doesn't know me. And it's my pleasure to see all of you. This actually brings me beyond great joy, to see what you all are doing and to keep up with what you're all doing. So I'm going to ask you all to do most of the talking. I didn't put the first question of, introduce yourself a little bit about who you are, but I kind of thought I would just go down and just say how I met you, and what that was kind of like for me, to be a little bit different. So Brianna, I will never forget that she applied to work at the Women's Center. I was like, wow, this is awesome. This person's awesome. Send her an email. A couple days later, I get a phone call from the First Lady's office. She was in Michelle Obama's office, working as an intern. Wow. And I was like, girl, you got this job.
Wow.
Like, oh my gosh.
My claim to fame.
Oh
15 minutes.
Yeah. But she was like, is that okay? I'm like, okay, what are you asking me for? Yes. Wow. Yes. And it was always great from there. Tanya, I had the pleasure to meet in full-blown COVID when she came on as our graduate assistant in HESA. And I see now with your tattoo, your sunflowers were always something that I resonated for me with you. But you bringing in silliness and fun, even when we were in the down times, even if we were feeling down ourselves, right? Was still able to just muster and bring joy and silliness and fun, right, into everything that we do. And that was something that I always loved. And Alicia, I met her sister first, her younger sister first. And then Alicia came after she had graduated. She comes from a long line of rock stars, just saying, super slacker. And it was the first time that we had a student who was also a mom and a veteran working in our office, and was always just genuinely impressed with all of the things that you could manage to do in your day, and she does more than that now. And her little son, who is so adorable, would be in my office with his car and wanting me to play with him, is now, as I said outside, he's a full-blown man. He is and he's so handsome and successful. So it is my pleasure to introduce these fabulous alum to you tonight, and I'll just have you, why don't we start at that end and go back. Introduce yourself just a little bit and when you graduated and your major background.
All right, so I'm Alicia Waring. My story is kind of interesting. I took a women's studies class my first semester, and so it was in August of '09 is when I got here. And in the women's studies class, Bob came and did a presentation. And I'm military, prior military, so I was Air Force, raised Air Force too. And I was just the most adamant person in the room that none of this stuff was true. I was like, there's no way. I can't, I'm like, what? No, that means everything that I know is challenged. And I was just like, absolutely not. Like, what? It's her fault. It's so-and-so's fault. They did this, they did that. No, you could not tear me away from the right side of the room. And then, fast forward, and then I see the job at the Women's Center for Bob. And I went in, and you're supposed to read the script on the purple sheet and say whether or not this is consent. And that's when it hit me that everything that it was like I was back in that room, back in the women's studies classroom. And I was like, oh my gosh. My own experiences of peers, experiences of fellow airmen. No, this is pretty clear cut to me. This is not consent. And it was like I broke down and cried because I was like, I can't even believe this. And so that was the beginning of my feminist work. And really also understanding the intersectionality, right, of being a Black woman, of being a veteran, a mixed woman, but being a veteran, and so forth. And so I pursued my bachelor's in psychology with a minor in women's studies after that experience. And then went on and founded the Women Veterans Group at here at UConn, yeah. And so then I got my master's in kinesiology with a concentration in the social science of sport and graduated in 2013 with that.
Wow. It's incredible.
Thank you.
My name is Tanya Flores. I usually create pronouns. I am not an original Husky grad. I'm a graduate transplant grad. I came to UConn to pursue my master's degree in higher education student affairs. And kind of part of the deal with HESA is that there's a graduate assistantship attached to it that makes it a very sweet deal because then you don't have to pay for graduate school. And I was looking at all the different options, and the ones that stood out to me by far were the cultural center ones. Myself being a Latina woman, I was like, oh my God, PROLAC, like this is the one, I'm gonna get it. I've always been that person, I'm gonna go for it, I'm gonna get it, it's gonna be great. And it wasn't an option. I was like, okay, pivot, all right, what else is out there, what else can I do? And I had thrown a couple of different things on there in different spaces, and I saw the Women's Center, and I did my undergrad at a very small school that didn't have specific centers, at one big space for everyone with any kind of minoritized identities. And I was like, sure, let's throw the Women's Center in there and see what happens. I remember interviewing, and it was really interesting. I was able to really play to strengths of having worked at an all-women's school and having been in all-women's spaces before, but the interview really was impactful because I was being asked questions and starting to think about aspects of my own identity as a woman that I hadn't really before, because my entire life, first and foremost, I've always been Latina, and the Latin American piece was always very clear to me. The woman piece always came secondary. So I'm in this interview with Kathleen and the graduate assistant at the time, and I'm like having this conversation. I was like, yeah, that's a really great question. And you say that, but I like actually was taking it in like, that is a really good question. And there came a piece after where you have to rank which graduate assistantship you're really interested in. And I was really taken aback by how I ranked it originally when I was interviewing with how I ranked it afterwards, and then being given the position at the Women's Center and really negotiating for the first time in my life, to Alicia's point, the intersection of my identities in a way that I hadn't really considered it before, because for me it's always been my ethnicity, my race has always come first. To really consider that in the premise of my own womanhood was really interesting. And it's something that rings true throughout my time here at UConn. It's something that rings true for me now. And it's really exciting. I love coming back here and seeing how the work continues and how I can continue to support it.
It was really great to hear your story, both of your stories of how you got to the Women's Center. So I'm Brianna DeVivo. I graduated in 2017 with a poli-sci and women's studies double major. And I actually don't know if I've told you this. I must have at some point, because I would always be in Kathy's office and I'd be like, oh, we're gonna touch base for like 5 minutes, but then it would be much longer. And so I went to E.O. Smith High School, so literally next door. And for your senior to graduate, you have to do a senior project. And so I just knew that I was going to do abortion rights, so that's what I did. But you had to also do some community element. And we were brainstorming what to do, and I knew UConn had a women's center, so it was definitely either like finals week, or maybe it was after everyone had left. I don't remember what time of the year it was, but it really could have been once all the students were gone. I went and I talked to a student, and I was like, what's going on? Do you have anything I can help with? She was like, no, not really. We don't have anything else planned for the semester, but I have a feeling it's because it was the summer. So, which I should have known that, but that was my first experience. I just knew that existed, and at that point I was committed to going to UConn probably at that time of the year. So I was just always aware that it existed, and I also just only entered as a poli-sci major, and I took my first women's studies class in probably halfway through the semester, I was like, all right, sign me up for the major, let's go. And so I think from there, I just knew it was a place that I wanted to get more involved in. And it's almost like every event kind of blends together, but there were certainly some events that I went to probably my freshman year. I think I was a member of UConn Now at that time, so we would always meet in the center. So I just knew it was a place that I wanted to work. So I started working my junior year everyone at the Women's Center helps with everything, but I was doing a lot of the civic engagement, and Elect Her was our big project, which encourages young women to run for office if it's, campus-wide, local, state, federal, all of that. So that was what I worked with. And one of the things I was doing probably to procrastinate from my law school studies a little bit, because that's what I'm doing right now, I wanted to go back and look at my senior project about abortion rights. And it's a sign of how much I've grown, but I also think maybe on some level mainstream feminism has grown. I looked at it and realized there was just a total lack of intersectionality. Like, so clear to me now. It probably would have been clear to, freshman year me once I, got into the women's studies and really understood what that meant. But that was something that at not only the women's studies program, but I think the Women's Center makes it just like an integral part of your feminist lens, like as it should be. And so for someone, like a white woman who grew up never really having to think about race that much in that way, and noticing the absence of a 2013 PowerPoint on abortion rights, it's shocking to see that it just wasn't there. And I think one of the things at the Women's Center, it makes it first nature. That's always included no matter what. So that's one of the things that makes me so proud of that I gained from my experience here. It's just that growth.
Awesome. Well, you started to say what it is that you're doing now. So if you want to talk a little bit more about that, and we'll go back down the road.
Sure. So right now I'm wrapping up my first year at Quinnipiac Law. I'm a law student.
Ooh.
Thanks. So I'm 5 years removed. So I went back this year mostly because I've been doing sort of government work ever since I graduated, and I always just had this desire to learn more and to be able to serve people better. And the law can do that. And there's a lot of different things, and I've realized that I enjoy learning about almost everything. So law kind of gives you that. So I'm in my first year, and it's been going well. And prior to that, I worked for Congressman Courtney, who's the federal representative for Eastern Connecticut, and then Senator Chris Murphy. Both roles were really similar. I was an outreach assistant and field representative for the offices, and pretty much just had to do kind of everything. Just keep in touch with the news, plan events for them, recommend where they should go next time they're in the state, keep in touch with issues that are happening, and build relationships throughout the community. And that it was really exciting. My first job, I really worked with casework. So people who would call the office, field their calls, try to get them help with federal programs. And then the second job was more out and about meeting people in the community, which was mostly all during COVID, so it was challenging, but it was really great I got a front seat to what so many different communities in Connecticut were dealing with at the time. And that really is what pulled me into wanting to do law, because I sitting there thinking there's answers to this, there's ways we can do it differently. I want to be able to have the knowledge to help communities do that one day. So that is where I've been for the past 5 years.
Awesome. How about you?
Yes. My goal in life is to be a Jill of all trades, a master of none. So from graduating undergrad in 2018, I've had 4 or 5 different jobs in 4 or 5 different areas. And that's exactly how I like it. I love to learn new things and be in different spaces. So right now in this chapter of my life, I am working at the Center for Career Education at Columbia University, which is really cool. I'm doing a lot of program management work. I'm doing a lot of student counseling, which I was able to get a little bit from the Women's Center in my time here at UConn and KESA. The nature of how I connect with students looks very different, but ultimately when you have a student who comes in crying because they don't have an internship or because things aren't working out for them, the soft skills that I really picked up here at the Women's Center just carry through when it comes to higher education work, which is really great. Just before that, I was also working in college access, which is really something that I've been doing for a long time, even prior to my master's degree. Again, all in the realm of education, but always student focused, student centered, and trying to support them as much as I can.
So I am like you, like to switch it up a little bit. After I graduated from here in 13, I was like, I'm going to be a team advisor. I'm going to be an academic advisor. That's my goal. That's my dream. That's what I'm going to do. And that's not what other people had in store for me, right? And so I had to kind of think about what opportunities were out there and then seize them. So I worked in K-12 for 4 years here in Connecticut and then in Wisconsin. In Connecticut in suburban community that previously I had worked in Hartford, in the north end of Hartford. And so the things that I saw there did not equip me for the things that I saw in suburbia, right? And so I was like, wow, these are some very different adversities and obstacles and so forth that these students are facing. Equally detrimental, equally devastating, but just different in the face, right? And then moving to Wisconsin and being in the Midwest where rural poverty is very prevalent, and seeing students, I've primarily been in like alternative education. So students that don't really have the support at home, don't have the support of their families, their parents, the school itself, if it's like an outplaced kind of facility. And then it became just really, really challenging because I had one student, his mom said, you need to hustle to eat. He was 14. And I was like, I can't do this. Like my son is 10, and this is just really, really hard for me. And the whole reason why I went to school is to be in higher education. And I taught at UConn. I taught a first year semester course, or first year STEM. And so I decided that I was going to use my vocational rehabilitation through the VA and go back for a master's in higher education leadership, and started doing advising. And one of the things that was really eye-opening for me was the number of students that are homeless in higher education, the number of students that are foster wards of the state, the lack of support, the lack of resources, awareness even. The level of awareness is just really not where I thought it should be. And so at some point I'll go for my EdD, and that's what my focus is going to be. But in the meantime, since I've been doing academic advising since I graduated from that master's at University of Wisconsin-Whitewater in 18 or 19. And so now I teach at Post. So I teach an online course at Post, which is like a new student seminar kind of class for students that, it's interesting, the demographic at Post is kind of like, I have students that are in safe houses. I have students that are in halfway houses. I have students that have their grandchildren live with them. So the demographic is really interesting, and it's the majority of my students have had horrible experiences in education. And so this is their reintroduction into education. And so it's really critical to me and for me that I present this bright, cheerful face that like, hey, you can do this. I know it's been a long time, but college is so different from high school. College is so different from middle school and elementary school. And I know you had horrible experiences there, but we're gonna make this really worth your while. So I do that. And then I'm a team advisor at Central Connecticut State University. I have 4 teams that I advise: football, women's lacrosse, swimming and diving, and women's track. And then part of that is we do workshops weekly. So I renamed the workshop series SAS, which is the Student Athlete Success Series. And so I bring different departments on campus and to athletics, Because a lot of times with athletics, the students kind of go to the gym, go to class, and go home, right? Or go to their dorm. They don't really access other pieces of campus, for instance, career development, for instance, tutorial services. And so it's imperative to me that students know, hey, these resources and services and support, this exists for you as well.
Awesome. So thinking about, and I think you've all touched on this a little bit in different ways, but thinking about your time at the center, what were there things about that that helped you to prepare for the roles that you're in now, or change your mind about things of where you thought you might be going, or solidify your idea of what those might be? And anybody can go first on that.
So when I was in the Women's Center, in addition to the Women Veterans Group, working with Kathleen and doing that, I also had an internship at the African American Cultural Center. And so I remember going there and talking about a specific experience I had where I went to get my car detailed. And the guy not only overcharged me, but did not do a great job at detailing my car. And I remember talking to the other students in the African American Cultural Center, AACC, and saying, I think that this would be different if I were a dude. And they were like, wait, what? And I'm like, they're like, it's because you're black. And I'm like, but I also think when we look at stereotypes of men and women, when we look at stereotypes of groups of people, the idea that's put out there is dudes know about cars, right? And so he's not going to get over on me because I'm going to know on some level, just because I'm a dude, that I know that he's getting over on me. And I remember like really trying to kind of hit that home, and it wasn't received the way that I thought that it was going to be. And so again, pointing to that intersectionality where the Women's Center was always intentional about, there are multiple ways that we're discriminated against, but then the good thing is that then there are multiple ways that we can combat this, right? So it's not just the negative aspect, it's also, this is empowering. And I wore purple today because of the Women's Center colors. I don't have any teal. But I was like, let me rock my purple. But the empowerment behind being there, and the empowerment behind, yes, I recognize all these different things are existing, and I'm facing these horrible things, but there's hope behind that. And I think that same hope is what got me to 16 years after I realized what I wanted to do, to keep at it and to know that this is going to come true for me. And 16 years later, it did, you know?
Yeah, the intersectional piece for sure has been such a piece of impact. I think the other piece for me, and Kathleen and I, oh my gosh, Kathleen and I would have conversations for hours about just like all of these things and all of the theories and what am I gonna do and who am I, and she would just sit there so patiently just like, oh, you get it, we'll figure it out. Yeah. Like let's keep talking this through, Tanya. And one of the big conversations that we kept having, especially towards the end of my time at the Women's Center, was I don't know what I'm gonna do after this. Like am I gonna go PhD, PhD? Am I going to go into the workforce? And if so, in what capacity? Stay in higher education? I was also in K-12 at one point. I'm like, do I go back to K-12? What am I going to do? And I'll never forget, one of the pieces that she would always drive home was, just remember, you can do this work anywhere. And when I think about higher education and I think about this work, it's so easy for us to fall back to, this work belongs in, to, and at the cultural centers. It belongs in these very quote-unquote DEI spaces. That's where those things happen. This is where that work gets done. And I think one of the things that's been really impactful for me, working at a place that you don't think of DEI when you think of a Center for Career Education. You think about getting a job. And the reality is that the inequity that exists within a place like that, in a place like an Ivy League school like Columbia, is intense, and is a really good reminder for myself that the work that I was doing at the Women's Center absolutely has a place in the work that I'm doing now at the Center for Career Education. And it's a lesson that I'm taking with me throughout as I continue to see within higher education, I would love to work at other women's centers and other Pearl-Lex and all these different spaces because they're comfortable and they're familiar. And I can also do this work and potentially also have bigger impact in places where these conversations and this work aren't happening and isn't being done. And I'm grateful because I never saw myself working at a place like a Center for Career Education. I look like I work in one of those places now. It's working out, and I'm grateful because now we're being very intentional about getting in touch with women groups on campus to talk about things like pay inequity. We're building liaisonships with different student groups and different colleges, and making sure that we're touching the different schools and the different populations that may not know how to navigate our resources, how to get in touch with our resources, how to utilize them. And oftentimes they are people who are most minoritized. So again, just bringing those lessons to places where they may not be as utilized otherwise.
Yeah, I think that really speaks to my experience working for like two federal representatives, because their goal isn't feminism or DEI work, but one of the things that I've been really lucky is that they're all of those ideas are second nature, are received with open ears. So one of the things that we really prioritize for the senator's office is like, okay, who traditionally isn't invited to events that the senator hosted? Like, what communities get left out of this conversation, or what conversations are happening that a senator might not necessarily be involved in? How can he, lend that influence to something that is not always, broadcast or the biggest news or people really touch up on? And then even down to the little things of making sure that that we get people represented in all those different conversations. Like, okay, actually, are we hosting a panel, and is it all men? Is it all white guys? Is it all white people? Like, that is something that when we would build events, we pay particular attention to. But I think there's been like a couple events where that DEI work that's not necessarily, what you necessarily would expect a senator's staff to be paying attention to. We hosted a pandemic recovery sort of food insecurity conversation down in New London. So we worked with that community to talk about, food access, also talking about, public health, and making sure we had different communities represented at the table. And what also I think is really exciting is to meet people throughout the state that have those same goals as the Women's Center. Like, I saw that reflected in New London particularly so much that it's one of the reasons why I love that city and the people there, because they really embody this center's work. And relatedly too, one of the big things that I always reflect upon when I think about my time at the Women's Center is interpersonal democracy. Okay, you might be on a team with people, but how can you make sure your coworker, or your friends, your leader, your co-leaders' ideas are championed along with yours? Making sure that everybody has a voice. And that's one of the good things. When I started at the senator's office, we had an outreach team, and a lot of my other coworkers also thought about making sure we have different voices represented at the table. So making sure I did that as well, bringing in their voice, their ideas. Just working together, and not being hierarchical about getting the job done. That's a big thing. It's just stuck. It's completely stuck with me. And now, as I go into a volunteer leadership role at Quinnipiac with a club, I'm thinking about, okay, how do I get prepped and ready to be an inclusive and democratic leader among my peers on the board with me?
Yeah, I did have one more thing. I have several, but I'm just going to do one. So I think, so there's the formal kind of education that we took from the Women's Center, right? And then there was the more informal, organic conversation that comes up and those experiences. And so one of those that was very powerful for me was when I first started doing facilitations, there was one gentleman who would do facilitations with me. and he's a white male, and I'm a mixed female. And so our dynamic somehow just kind of worked. We had amazing facilitations. Like, we got great feedback. It was just really, really good. We could see the gears turning. And Benita, who was previously the VOP coordinator, would say, you're planting seeds, you're planting seeds. So we had an amazing relationship. I mean, outside of VOP, like, he would hang out with me and my son, and they would go and talk about dinosaurs and all kinds of stuff. So then fast forward maybe 2 years, and I was in my graduate program, and this individual was in her graduate program. And so she contacted me and she said, hey, let's have lunch, like, it's been forever. And I'm like, absolutely. So we go to Frank Pepe's in Manchester, and she looks amazing. Like, she looks like glowing, just absolutely amazing. And I said, I don't really know about the trans population, trans males, trans females. I don't know anyone that I know of. But was it like, and this was so privileged of me, was it like you always knew you were a female? And she looked at me and she was like, no, that wasn't it at all. And I was like, humble yourself, open mouth, insert foot. I was like, well, what was it? If you don't mind, like, if you mind, if I'm breaching, then let me know. And she said, I can never look in the mirror. I couldn't look in the mirror at myself. And every time I would just kind of quickly pass the mirror. And over time, and with some reflection and some research and a lot of, like, consternation, I couldn't look in the mirror because the person in the mirror wasn't who I saw in my head. And I was like, how ignorant of me. I am a mixed woman. I'm a single mom. I'm a veteran, a female veteran, disabled female veteran. And if someone asked me if my story was the same as Joe Schmo's, because that person's a veteran, I would be offended. And that's the reason why I started the Women Veterans Group. Because I said my experiences are vastly different from this white dude who's running the Veterans Group. And so a big part of what I take with me from the Women's Center is everyone's narrative is different. And don't make assumptions. And really lead with inquiry.
Wow. Well, you know, I mean, and just thinking about, you know, Benita saying, you know, you're planting seeds, right? That's one of the greatest rewards to me of doing this work, is that I like to tell people I get to grow feminists, right? And so here's my garden, not my garden, here's our garden, let's be clear. Right, that it's a collective, and that's what we hope that we can do, right, in those spaces, because you've all probably heard me say too, the hardest part of my job is saying goodbye, because y'all leave, and you know, but then it's just amazing when you come back, and so, but then it is, right, we're all perfectly imperfect, and so I think that's the place of being genuinely committed to doing the work, which clearly you are. And other people are growing feminists because you're meeting them in New London, right? That's what gives me hope, right? That is truly what gives me hope. So thank you for sharing those things. And so on that, what is it that you know now that you wished you knew when you were at the Women's Center, or that maybe you got from the Women's Center? You got something?
Yeah. So I think, and it reminded me once we were all out there together chatting, how in some ways the Women's Center, I mean, I think we all know this because we're here and we work there. It's such a sacred place, and being just surrounded by people who have a baseline understanding of feminism, anti-racism, how we accept others, doesn't always exist outside of the Women's Center. And I realized how lucky I was, and even it even goes down to different things like the way we talk about bodies, diets, things like that. That's just not the norm. So when I graduated, I was kind of thrust back into a world where yeah, you have to do a little bit of teaching. And one of the things that I always remind myself, I had to, you would say it's the water we swim in, so you're not immune to it. So that's something I remind myself of, okay, like you're never done learning. But then also giving people a little bit of grace where they are still learning, I'm still learning, all of that. So that's just a thing I've really reflected on. And I don't really know, I think that's just like a lifelong understanding of the way, you know, we interact with the world. But I would say that was my big takeaway, even though I wish I had something a little bit more positive to say, but that really hit me once I graduated. Like, oh yeah, you were kind of in a lucky space.
Yeah, no, completely echo. You took the words out of my mouth. I'll never forget when I started at the Women's Center, I emailed Kathleen. It was like, I just want to make sure we're on the same page. Like, is there a dress code? Like, I want to make sure I show up appropriate and ready for work. And she answered everything else. I saw her the next day and she was like, yeah, can we talk about that question you had? And I was like, yeah, like, is this not okay? Like, I want to make sure that I was, you know, a business casual or business appropriate. She was like, Tanya, I won't encourage this necessarily, but you could come in here naked if you want. And I wouldn't stop you. Like, I'm never gonna tell you what to put on your body. And I was like 3 days in, and I was like, okay, this is not going to be what I thought it was going to be. And I think, again, just really to echo what you were saying, just this idea of, I wish I had known then, because I remember both, like, you know, Kathleen, Kathy, just everyone kind of saying, you know, you're not gonna find this necessarily everywhere else. This is a very specific place. We do things in a very not particular, but just a very special, very different kind of way. And you're kind of in it, and you have classes, and you're stressed, and you're just like, yeah, sure. And I go to work dressed like this now, and I remember a time and a place where I used to go to work in jeans and a t-shirt, and I was taken just as seriously, and I was respected just as much. I was having these fantastic, meaningful conversations with students, peers, managers alike, and really thinking thoroughly about what does disruption look like on different levels. How are we taking care of ourselves and each other? How are we working together to do that? And we're not having those conversations necessarily at that level where I'm at now. And I wish I could go back and just tell 2020 Tanya, like, hey, everyone's telling you this, but future years telling you, like, it really is a special time in your life. Just soak it in. Just soak it in as much as you can, because when you leave this place, you gotta wear heels, you gotta wear dress. Your boss isn't gonna tell you that you can come in naked. They're not gonna tell you that, so just take it in while you can.
Yeah. So I wrote a couple things down, and I want to see what I wrote.
Of course you
for this one. So, when I did the intro and I talked about, like, my introduction to the Women's Center and feminist work and so forth, like I said, I was very much on, like, this is not true, and so what I wish, or what I know now, or what I wish. What's the question? What do I know now? Okay. That you can, that the impact that you can have on people when you're planting seeds, you just don't even know. So the impact that VOP had on me was tremendous. And it was also little by little, right? It was that facilitation. And then it was maybe a conversation with my son. And then it was something else that maybe happened that I had, like, just a little bit of buzzing in the back of my head that, this may be because I'm a female. To working and being a VOP facilitator. But the impact piece, like, so one of the schools that I worked at, like I said, I was in Wisconsin, and so I was at this alternative education program that was in this building, not even close to the regular school, okay? And then we shared the building with a gifted program. And the gifted program, so I was the teacher for the alternative school kids. And then the gifted program was this guy, white dude, okay? I couldn't get more white dude than him. And he, and I would go in there and I was like, all right, we're gonna do this. And I've always been very committed to understanding who we are, right? And so I would have them do, okay, we're gonna journal. We're gonna do a word of the day. We're gonna go outside and we're gonna walk around the parking lot. I was very like non-traditional in my approach to these kids because I also understood, again, the narrative piece, tying everything in, that I didn't know who they were. And I wasn't going to get to know them by saying, sit in front of this computer and do these 18 lessons and I'll holla at you at noon. That wasn't gonna happen. And so I'm like, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that, we're gonna have conversations. I remember at one point I had said, we're gonna make a poster and it's gonna say, just because I'm an alternative education student doesn't mean. And then you fill it in with whatever it is that you wanna say. And I was an alternative education student myself, and so I made one, and then we all had our posters and so forth. I was there for about a year and a half before I went back to school for my master's. And so he contacted me a year and a half ago. Yeah, because Ava was not born. So it was about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. And he said, I just want to let you know that you really opened my eyes and you really changed my mind. Working with you was really enlightening. And I'm like, it's Tuesday. What's going on? Like, why are you, what's up? But I was like, moved to tears. And I was like, thank you so much, oh my gosh. And then we caught up and he's telling me all the stuff that he's doing. He's not at that school anymore, he's at a different school. And he's being very intentional with building relationships with all of his students and understanding that you may not necessarily know personally what the student is going through. But again, we lead with inquiry. We don't make assumptions. We understand that everyone has their own narrative and treat them as such. And that's powerful. And that came directly from, like, I wish I had known then, like, wow, the impact that you can have. It's mind-blowing.
And it continues, right? Because I can certainly say that too. One of the privileges of doing this work too, is that I'm colleagues with many of our former students, right? I have a whole file of notes that come back at different times to say, because you don't realize sometimes the impact, and sometimes you'll never know, right? Mm-hmm. But you can know in your heart that you are, right? That you really are making an impact.
And that you're trying. And I think that's the key, right? Is that I know at the end of my day, I can look in the mirror and say, Alicia, you did the next right thing. #Anna. Right? You can say that with confidence. And that is something that I can sleep with. Whether or not this person said thank you or I appreciate you or whatever, I'm not looking for that. I'm looking for, am I a good person? At the end of the day, am I doing this work solely for the purpose of helping us all as a society? Yes.
Yep. So I want to follow up on the we do talk to you about, right, that this is a unique place to be and what have you. I think the hope is that we're providing some tools to create some of that similar space in the places that you go, right? Whether it's even in your social groups or in your jobs. Has that been something that you've been able to do? And maybe not, right? Because I get that challenge. What do you think you would need to advance that, right? So if you were to come back to like something that we can support, or even letting the students that are graduating this year will see this, what things can they bring out there?
I think it's conversation.
Yeah.
I really think I wrote down all these things. Soul clan, privilege walk, social justice thing,
Yeah.
yada, 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 right?
the identity, the cards put, 10 different identifiers on your card, throw away 5. But but it really boils down to conversations, like authentic, genuine conversations. I don't think it, in my opinion, I don't think it can get more plain than that, because of the voices that aren't at the table, because of the minoritized, because of the marginalized stigma, right? Because of the fact that my voice doesn't matter, my experiences don't matter. Hey, what do you think? What are you up to? What have your experiences been? I think it really boils down to, hey, your voice does matter and I want to hear it. And I think you have some great ideas.
Yeah. Recognizing your own voice also matters in that space, in those spaces. I work in a pretty diverse department, a fairly diverse department. I think that one of the things that I remember I've really taken away from the Women's Center, and it's something that I know for a fact is still ongoing, is this idea of like the cultural centers are so siloed, they don't talk to each other, they don't work together. What if there's a gay woman of color? What center does she go to? And this idea of like who are your people in these key spaces? Who can you connect with? How are we bringing these different folks together so that we're best serving the student from a holistic standpoint as much as possible? And I think that when it comes to something like career education, the truth of the matter is that people gotta eat, people need jobs. So what happens when our Columbia College students have the in at Morgan Stanley and McKinsey and BCG, but our general studies students, who are non-traditional students by definition, a lot of them are veterans, a lot of them are parents, a lot of them have come back after some kind of hiatus from higher education. What happens when the funding doesn't apply to them? And now they're doing this whole strike because the funding doesn't look the same. How are we responsible for that demographic of students? What are we doing? How are we inviting them to the table? Who are our connections there? And I've been pondering a lot about this because these are very real conversations that we're having in real time. And this piece about, who are our people in these spaces and how are we bringing them into the fold? How are we collaborating? How are we having these difficult conversations? And how am I also allowing myself to be heard in those spaces? Because I know that I have something to say. I have these experiences. I've worked in these different places. How am I also allowing myself to be a voice at that table? Has been something that I've been chewing on lately, for sure.
Talking with your mouth full, huh?
I think a lot about intentionality and being present, which feels a little woo-woo to say, being present. But I do think like the way to be intentional is to be present and to like be aware of your surroundings, thinking a lot about how you have an impact on others. I think about that whenever like I'm in a peer group or like for instance in law school we have people of all different ages, and sometimes you do have to do group work and thinking about like how do we make sure, or like what even goes down to this basic. One time we were splitting up a group of readings to present. Like, okay, well I have this opinion, but I don't want to just tell everyone what to do, so let's all like work together to figure it out. So I think I always think about intentionality, and that's what I think about a lot of the conversations that we would have on our staff Fridays. Mm-hmm. Everyone's just there at the table and focus on that one subject, whatever we were talking about at the time. We're all just there together, really thinking and really digesting about it. And one of the things that sort of mirrors the Women's Center, when I was a sophomore, I took feminist theory, and the professor who taught it kind of viewed it as, you're going to be confused for like a good part of this course, but at one point it's going to click because you're just immersed in it. And that's how I feel, that's how you grow through the Women's Center, is that all of those things that we're talking about, or the things I reflect upon, like, oh yeah, at one point I just didn't know these things, and now it's just, it is who I am.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yay.
So yeah, no, yay.
Yay.
You're such a testament to all of you.
Okay, well, time is going quickly, so I'm gonna ask for each of you to share what piece of advice you would have for current Women's Center students as they look for future careers or future programs to apply to. Anybody?
I think the big thing is that you don't have to be working at a women's center, working at a women's focused agency to do feminist work. It takes a variety of different forms. Like, I really do think, because I've thought about this a lot in terms of, you know, I've been working for the government, and I probably will once I'm an attorney. I can be a feminist in the way that I interact with my staff, interact with coworkers, interact with the public, like just embodying it. But then I think to reflect on if doing that is fulfilling, or if you do want to take it to the next step of, you know, maybe, for example, going back and working at a women's center, or, you know, working for a domestic violence organization, something on that. And plus, there's a plethora of nonprofits who do feminist work and have it built into their missions. So I think recognizing that you can do it anywhere, and trying to, you know, evaluate for yourself if environments are, you know, actually accepting of that. So like checking in with yourself as you're working, because I think the transition from undergrad to post-grad life is really challenging, and it's not talked about that much. So like if you're feeling like you're losing parts of your identity and who you are as a person for the first couple of months, years out of school, like that's right. It's very normal, and I think so many people actually really go through about it, and we should talk about how that it's really tough to just, you know, you have 4 years of your life and it's totally different. So like I said, be intentional about yourself and about what you're doing, and I mean, you can plant the seeds anywhere.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. I think I hearkened toward that earlier, that career education places are not the first place we think of when we think of feminism, but you can do the work everywhere. And also, maybe a paycheck is just a paycheck, and that's okay. And who you are and how you live your life also matters. Your values as a feminist, your values as someone who's an advocate, interpersonally and otherwise, for minoritized individuals, maybe for yourself as a minoritized individual, that also matters. The idea of giving back. How are you giving back to your community in ways that maybe isn't the paycheck? Are you coming back to do panels at the Women's Center? Are we engaging with UConn Gives? Like, there's so many ways to give back with our time, our money in the future. I know that, you know, post-grad life is rough sometimes with the paychecks. But thinking of ways that we can give back, they exist in so many varieties, in so many ways. It's not so much like your title post-grad doesn't have to be, you know, program feminist. It doesn't have to be to really give value to the work that you're doing. Otherwise, you're still going to be a feminist when you graduate. It's going to be okay.
Yeah. And to kind of piggyback off of what both Tanya and Brianna said, mine is to listen to yourself. Listen to yourself. If a position or a major sounds like it's appealing and you go and you get like butterflies and it's exciting and so forth, then that means something. Listen to that. Honor that, right? Because I don't think we're taught to honor that. And in marginalized populations, it's almost like the feelings that we have, or the thoughts that we have around who we are and who we want to be, as it relates to career, or like you have to make money. You have to be this super rich person that is gonna, get out of undergrad and, go buy a house for $60,000, whatever, $100,000, whatever. But the bottom line is that we're not really listening to ourselves. And I think it's critical to do that because then that skill just gets better and better, right? We listen to ourselves as it relates to what we eat better, we feel better. We listen to ourselves as it relates to, what job, if we're in the position to. Sometimes, like you said, a paycheck is a paycheck. And we have to recognize that. I'm not in the position right now to be able to do necessarily what I want to do. However, outside of 9 to 5, 8 to 4, 10 to whatever, what can I do? How can I fulfill these other pieces of me? And again, listening to ourselves and understanding and assessing, how am I doing, right? Being present in those moments, I think will get us to, to really embrace who we are and to, and to find that joy and understand that there are going to be moments when you're going to be crying in the corner. There will be those moments, but there's also moments where you're shining bright and you're like, I feel amazing and I feel like this is how I saw myself. And when we listen to ourselves and honor who we are, then I think those moments happen far more than the crying in the corner moments.
Absolutely, they do.
Awesome. And you can always remember that the Women's Center is always here for you as well.
Definitely.
So, to
Listen,
cry
I
in the corner
text Kathy on
I-
a regular. I'm like, Kathy.
I stay emailing Kathleen. I still am just like, Kathleen. She's like, you don't work here. I know, but I just want to let you know that this thing happened.
That's too funny. Well, thank you all so much for coming and talking with us. It is so awesome to see you and all hear about the amazing things that you're doing. Before we end, does anybody have any questions that you would like to ask of our fabulous panel?
Y'all are amazing.
Okay, comment. We all agree. You are amazing. All right.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.